This is going to be all history here, no game. The history is about China, the Second Opium War, and the Taiping Rebellion. And I want to look at both the history and the economics involved in it to talk about situations that, well, helped to develop modern China. Now, and that's where I want to start, modern China. In 1949, there was the Chinese Civil War, and on the 50th anniversary of the Chinese Civil War, the uh, Chinese film studios made a series of movies called the Revolutionary Historical Film on War. Uh, it's a it's a series of films, much like the Russians did with, I believe, 40 years after World War II. They or to coincide around that time, they made a series of films called Liberation that started at the Battle of Kursk and went all the way to the Battle of Berlin. Well, the Chinese made movies about their civil war, starting with Mao's base of operations in Manchuria and then working his way through conquering the rest of China. All right, well, and this particular one that I enjoyed the most of the series is the fight for Nanjing, Shanghai, and Hangzhou. And unfortunately, I can't find the DVD in my own house, but I found versions of it online, and I've linked below in the description. There's no English subtitles, but you won't need English subtitles for the link that I have at the time position I chose, because it depicts the HMS Amethyst incident. The situation is the Chinese army, as I mentioned, was advancing south from Beijing, coming into this area here, and was attacking across the Yangtze River to get to the city of Nanjing, which is the capital of the nationalists. Well, crossing a river is a very difficult thing. The Yangtze River is very wide. When I was in China getting those DVDs, I was also on I was touring the whole place, got on a train and slept overnight, woke up to see how wide the Yangtze River is. It's huge. And when you're making a huge river crossing, there's so much risk in there. You do not want a foreign naval vessel on the scene to complicate the picture. Regardless of what the British mission was, they were justifying their being in that area because of a treaty that they had signed and they said was still under force, that gave them the right of navigation on the Yangtze River, that blue thing that I've sketched roughly in. It's not exactly there, but trust me, it connects the major cities in China and is a very important waterway. And they're sailing up it. It's very navigable. It's very wide. The communist Chinese opened fire, first warning shots and then direct shots. Nationalist Chinese were also cheering this activity because they were very much against the British being there, even though ostensibly the British were kind of on their side. But the whole history in China had been leading up to this moment where finally in 1949, as a result of the communists opening fire on the Amethyst, damaging it, and forcing it back out, they had captured it, and there's some other stuff going on there as well. But the point was, they stopped the British and got them to turn around and go away, never to come back. That, they said, was the final nail in the coffin of the unequal treaties, of the gunboat diplomacy, stuff that had started back about 100 years before that incident. The other source I want to use here is a book by Robert Bickers called The Scramble for China, Foreign Devils in the Qing Empire, 1832 to 1914. I've got that in the description below as well. Okay, so let's go to the year, let's say 1850. And we have a situation where the First Opium War has been fought. The British signed a treaty that gave them an island off of the coast of China, what we would call Hong Kong, this little dot down here. I don't know if you can see the thing moving, so I should probably draw. We'll point to it. There we are. That thing there, that was Hong Kong, but only a wee tiny bit of it was Hong Kong, just the island. The peninsula across from the island was still Chinese territory. But they got that in the First Opium War, and they had opened up ports around the coast of China, one of the most important of which was Shanghai, which you see up here outlined in red. So I've got Hong Kong down south and Shanghai up north. Shanghai was had grown as a base for the British, and they used it for trading with the Chinese. Tea was the most important trade that they had, pulling stuff out. well, the most important legal trade. The most important illegal trade was opium, but that was illegal to sell in China. So the opium ships would have to park outside in international waters. Boats would come from the port on shore, break down the cargo, unload it onto the smuggler ships, and then they would go back into China and distribute the cargo there. Opium ship heads back to India for another load. But the profits from the opium still made it possible for the British to purchase Chinese goods and still have money left over for themselves. So no longer money flowing into China, money was net flowing out of China. Another part of this First Opium War was that other countries came to China and demanded treaties that would give them similar rights to the British, the right to trade. Now, they didn't have opium with them. They just didn't. It doesn't grow very well in France or Russia, but they nevertheless demanded trade rights with China equal to those of the British. And one thing the French demanded was the right to protect all Christians in China. Just remember that. It's going to be important later. And so with this opening up of China on the coast, more foreign influence enters into China. And one of these foreign influences is Christianity. And now we get the case of a young fellow, and I hope I get the name right, Hong Xiuchuan. I'll call him Hong. Hong was a young fellow who had studied hard to take the Imperial administration exam, and he had failed the entrance exam 5 times. That means he had let down his family, severely disappointed the ambitions of his family, his village, himself. He felt terribly about that. And then he caught a fever. So he's at a really low point, but he then has these visions or hallucinations, whatever you want to call it. But he certainly comes out of this fever with saying he likes this Christianity. He'd already been interested in it. And now he thinks he claims that he is the younger son of God, the younger brother of Jesus Christ. And although the European Christians who had taught him were saying no, that's not how it works. Jesus doesn't have a brother. Hong said, no, I'm going with this. And he was able to convert other people to follow after him. Primarily he didn't have much traction in Guangdong, which is the province near Hong Kong, but Guangxi, he was able to find some more converts. That's why you see the province of Guangxi with, this little coloration here, and Guangdong doesn't have much of it. That gives you a hint about what this map may be about. Yes, it's a map of the Taiping Rebellion, started by our friend Hong. Okay, he's able to draw followers from a minority group called the Hakka. I think he was a member of that group himself. They were not Han, they were not Yue, they're not Min. They were just another ethnic group within China. They didn't practice the same cultural customs that the Han did, so there's a bit of a conflict there. But anyway, he gets some of them together, and they begin to resist the government of the Qing dynasty. Now, is this a case of religion causing conflict? No. Religion is a factor in the conflict, but it's not causing it. And I want to be very careful in how I phrase this, because so many people say, get rid of religion, it's always causing wars. If we get rid of religion, we get rid of 90% of the wars, or some number. And that's just not true. The human will to power and the human will to resist injustice are both very strong, and both tend to lead people into violence. I can show you many genocides and wars that are at the hands of atheists or non-religious people, people who are seeking power unjustly. And I can also show you examples of people under the influence of religion doing things of an incredibly altruistic nature. True examples of self-sacrifice. Not seeking violence, not ever seeking violence. And my position is, Don't rip out all the religion and don't rip out all of anything. Learn to understand who we are as a people, and then if we can overcome our own spirit for violence, we can then set an example to hopefully teach others. It's a long game, I admit, but religion is a factor, but not the cause, or not the sole cause of this Taiping rebellion, because there's the incredibly heavy, there's injustice towards the peasantry, there's insensitivity toward them, there is a cultural conflict in that the Qing are not Chinese, and they make sure it's known that they are not the same as the Han or any other group. They are a separate ethnic group on top of all the others. So there's a resentment at that. There are a number of other factors that play into this. And Hong himself says some things that are pretty radical for the time, like women and men are equal. What? True nutcase kind of things there. What? Women and men are equal? That's insane. Of course they're not. In this time period, that's revolutionary. I agree with the statement, women and men are equal. But, hey, different times. But, so he leads them out, and his army shifts from that light tan area in the south to that orangey, dark orangey area around the Yangtze River. And that's where his army has the greatest source of power. The army grows quickly, starting around 1850, and takes the city of Nanjing and makes it their capital. Now, you see where Shanghai is, that circle, that red circle there. Well, there's a little area that's not colored Taiping because the foreigners in Shanghai said they weren't part of this conflict and that everybody should keep the fighting out. In fact, they started bringing in soldiers and mercenaries and volunteers to cordon off the area, and if any army got too close, whether they were attacking or defending, they'd open fire and drive them away. So Shanghai remains a separate area there from the Taiping Rebellion. And the initial reports of this Taiping Rebellion were that there's a Christian and he's fighting against tyranny. Wow, well, Christians who were opposed to tyranny all over Europe were thinking, this guy Hong, he's all right. He's our guy. A great Christian. And they were even more entertained by, at least the Protestant people were, by his usage of Protestant Chinese Christian terminology rather than Catholic Chinese Christian terminology. If you're a Catholic, the Catholic word for God in Chinese is different from the Protestant word for God in Chinese. And Hong was using the Protestant word for God. So all the Protestants in America and England are going, yeah, one of us, all right. And he's fighting tyranny. We fight tyranny too. And then the Americans go to the British, wait, we were fighting your tyranny. And the British go, hey, let's not talk about that right now. let's focus on the current events here. All right, so he's Christian, and there is a level of support for that. And that was one of the chief goals of the first Opium War, the ability to open up China for conversion to Christianity. The Christian missionary societies were elated that, yes, we've got an inroad. There's certainly fertile ground for Christianity in China. This is going to be great. And look at the result here. If he gets freedom, why, we can make all of China freed from the problems of idolatry and superstition. We'll bring them into a much more Christian and enlightened way of thinking and living. That was their belief. Then they found out what Christianity Hong was actually up to, and they didn't much care for it. When they found out, oh wait, he believes he's the younger brother of Jesus Christ. Oh, that's not really Sunday school around here. I don't even think the Episcopalians do that. I mean, no. I mean, they're pretty open-minded, but they're not that open-minded. Yeah. So there's a bit of he still has supporters, but once they find out what he's really doing, that support kind of wanes. There's like, Like, nah, he's not the same Christian we are. We don't know about that. So there's that. But then also the Taipings are saying they don't want any more of the opium trade. They're 100% against drugs. They don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't do opium, they don't gamble. Very straight arrow stuff. And the British are not happy with the ban on opium thing. It was okay when they could smuggle it in, but now that the Taiping are really fighting against it and their own people are working against it, they thought this is not good. If the Taiping succeed in taking over China, they will have a vigorous, centralized, Chinese-led government that replaces the Manchu-led Qing Empire. They could very well eradicate the opium trade. This was a serious concern. Now, there were British back in Britain, like Gladstone, a politician who said, well, good, opium is bad, we should not be doing this. And Lord Palmerston, who was from the opposite political side, was feeling like, well, it's not about opium. There's just trade, and free trade is very important. But yeah, it was a lot of the question was about opium. And so ultimately, which is more important for China, to bring it Christianity or to bring it opium? Which is more important? And we'll see which side the British pick in just a minute here. As it was, because the British enclaves, or the foreigner enclaves, were separated from the fighting, refugees from the fighting filtered into Hong Kong, and they filtered into Shanghai. The population of those areas swelled, and real estate prices went up, but the British were selling the real estate, so they charged very high prices, and there was a bit of a boom in those areas as people fled the fighting to those areas. There was profit to be made. Now, during this time also, the Qing official in Shanghai, when he saw the Taiping army approaching, realized that he couldn't keep control of the area. And so to help protect himself and his supporters in Shanghai, he handed over the customs collection duties to foreigners. The British, the French, the Russians, the Americans, whoever was there, they could now bring their own people in to collect the duties. This was really, really different. The Chinese government had now contracted out, as it were, to the foreigners to collect the customs. And as a result of this, British companies began complaining horribly about how their own countrymen had dared to collect a tariff and were interfering in the freedom of trade. This didn't play well back home. Even Lord Palmerston was going like, no, you're complaining because you were breaking rules and now you got caught. Play by the rules. We have fair trade, but we also have rules on it. And you are going to pay the duties on the stuff you're bringing in. We'll collect the duties and we'll make sure that it's done fairly and properly. It was already being done fairly and properly. It's just now it's being done fairly and properly by British. And so they take pride in it, and it gets kind of nationalist after that. But this is the first case that we have of Chinese authority being ceded to foreigners. And foreign custom duty collection will spread through spread to other ports and other areas of China through the years until it's finally ended by the Communist Revolution in 1949. Again, going back to that Amethyst incident, there's resentment there. So the years go on. The Taiping Rebellion begins in 1850. Around 1854, the Crimean War begins. And now, the uncertainty that's had here in Shanghai and Hong Kong, those two areas, the uncertainty in those areas is now added to it by the question of, will there be a Russian fleet that sails down this way and attacks the opium vessels? That attacks the tea vessels. What if they get involved there and start raiding our commerce? We must protect against it. And now calls come out of these areas to have additional military and naval presence in that area. So what started off as a trade delegation is quickly gaining the characteristics of a military base, a foreign occupation, or at least in terms of the customs collection. It is becoming less of a corporate effort and more of a national effort. As situations develop, the Taiping are unable to take Beijing. You can see where the tan area gets awfully close to Beijing, right around here, but it doesn't actually get there, and they fall back to their southern China base. All right. Well, as that happens, there is another rebellion called the Neon Rebellion in northern China, and this is mostly led by bandit groups that were rebelling against Qing authority. The same reason that the Taiping were rebelling, they didn't like the Qing, and so they rebel. There was no religion involved in that rebellion, but it added into the carnage that was already being caused with the Taiping rebellion. There are also rebellions out in western China and so forth. The whole Qing Empire is about ready to just collapse completely. Well, the British look upon the situation with concern. If China does fall apart completely, how are we going to trade with them? And what arises from that mess, if it's the Taiping, they're going to cut off the opium trade. Well, then there's an incident in Canton about a ship there called the Arrow. And it had a British captain and a Chinese crew, and there was questions about whether or not it was properly registered as a British ship. The local Chinese officials didn't think so. They thought it was flying a British flag, but it was actually a Chinese registered ship, but was flying a British flag. So it would appear to be under British rule rather than Chinese rule, and it could have been just a bunch of Chinese guys engaging in crime, but they were dressing up like the British so they could claim extraterritoriality, because that was a thing out of the First Opium War. You couldn't prosecute the British with Chinese law. They had to be reported to the British and subject to British law. And there were people who were Chinese but lived in the British Empire in places like Malaysia and other parts of the archipelago in the south, and they had come north with the British to act as interpreters and go-betweens, and they insisted that they were not Chinese. They had different hairstyle, different clothing style, and that helped to set them apart so they could not be treated as Chinese because they were actually British, who just looked a whole lot like Chinese because they were descended from Chinese. And then other Chinese who actually lived in China started copying them, and this led to trouble. And that's why we have the Arrow incident. The local Chinese authority ordered the British flag to be taken down and imprisoned most of the crew. He later released some of them, but not all, and the British were furious about this. How dare they insult the flag? Yeah, how dare they? How dare they? If you ever want to sound really imperious, just say, how dare they, but repeat it. Or break off in the middle and then repeat it, and do it with a very, like, make your mouth go like I did. How dare they? Do you know who I am? How dare you? And that's kind of the mindset that a lot of the British have. Then there's guys like Gladstone who are like, oh, please. This is a terrible misunderstanding. I don't buy it for an instant. And the guy may have been involved in criminal activity, and that may be why the flag got messed around with. Did you ask any questions? How dare you? And that was Palmerston's response to Gladstone, like, how dare you be un-British? How dare you be anti-British and take the side of our foe? And yeah, that kind of personal attack helped him win the following election in 1857, which is separate from the election that brought him into power as a result of the Crimean War. Well, okay, so there's the Arrow incident, And the British demand honor and justice and truth, freedom in the British way, and also the right to sell opium. And they got a bunch of troops from India to go into China and attack. And these are actual Indian troops. They're not British people stationed in India. No, they're large forces made up of Indians who have British officers over them, and they're used to fight in China. And that's how the British like to do it. They like to be the officers and let the other nationalities in the rank and file do all the dying. That's much more preferable to them. This was complicated in 1857 with the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, but it's really a big rebellion, not just a bunch of soldiers who said, I'm not going to eat that cartridge, but rather a much wider political and economic reaction to the British control of India. But because of that, there's a little interruption in the flow of troops from India to China. But once the British get the rebellion sorted, they keep bringing Indians back and keep attacking. And by 1858, they've got the Chinese beaten down and on the back foot. They come forward with the Treaty of Tianjin. Now, let me come back just a little bit here. We've had the Crimean War over in Europe, or that way, and that was something that brought down the Whig government and put the Tories under Palmerston into power. So there was a very jingoistic faction in England at this time. And they felt that they have dealt with the Russian threat appropriately in that war. But then following the war in 1856, they start to see Russians showing up in Shanghai and buying land and getting deals there, and they're worried. Are the Russians going to take over in this area? Are they now a threat? We're worried about them attacking our opium ships. What if they take over our trade? What if they find a way to take over the land, and now we're dealing with Russian officials instead of Qing Empire officials? The whole great game is now extended into China, and they're very worried about that. Then also you had the massive rebellion in India that led to the East India Company being just taken out of the picture and the place being reorganized as the Raj, a directly ruled area of the British Empire. So Britain in 1857, 1858 is in a state of imperial crisis. Its power is seen as shaky. It couldn't force the Russians to back down. They had to fight a war against them. They couldn't control things in India. The Indians rose up in rebellion. They want to make a firm stand in China. And so that's the prelude, the background for the Treaty of Tianjin. They're dealing with an imperial crisis. There was a challenge in the government over the Opium War as well as the conduct in India. And the sitting government has returned to power. Lord Palmerston wins that election of 1857 and sees that now as a chance for him to extend and deepen the British mandate in Asia. So in 1858, there's the Treaty of Tianjin. Number one, there will be more British legations up and down the coast, more open ports. That there would also be a British legation in the capital of Beijing. Now, previously, if the British had wanted to deal with Chinese officials, they had to do so with provincial officials in Canton or Shanghai. Now they're going to have an embassy in the capital in Beijing and direct access to the emperor. That's one of the conditions of the treaty. They also have here, I'm looking at my notes here, the right of travel. They can move anywhere they want in China. They demand an indemnity. The Chinese must basically pay for the war. And right of navigation along the Yangtze River, that blue line there. Now they can go and open up not just treaty ports on the coast of China, but on the river. Even though the river itself is still controlled by the Taiping rebellion, they're recognizing the Qing as the legitimate government authority over the area. Which is more important, Christianity or opium? And if you want to talk about wars started by religion, let me talk to you about wars that started over drugs or became quickly involved with drugs. Ooh. Yeah, it's bad. And it gets bad and worse. This whole area of research there. Anyhow, so that's the Treaty of Tianjin, that the British can navigate along the Yangtze River. They open up more ports. They get a embassy in the capital, and the Chinese will pay an indemnity. And the Qing, they'd signed it, but later a faction comes into the court that rejects the treaty. And so they tell the British, no, treaty's over, we're not doing it. And the war starts again. And this time the British and French go directly attacking into Beijing. They surround, they come in, and they're moving against that area, and they're following a river path up there. As they do so, there's an American ship nearby that's supposed to be neutral, but the captain of the ship, as he sees the British fighting and struggling and not really winning the day, he declared blood is thicker than water, and opens fire on the Chinese. This captain had been a veteran of the War of 1812. He had fought the British. But now, some 40 years later, he says blood is thicker than water. What's the blood? Well, they're both white, and they're fighting against a non-white opponent. This is the beginning of an idea that all us whites have to stick together in China. Some of us may be French, some of us may be Russian, German, British, American. Doesn't matter. We're all of us going to deal with the Chinese collectively. Whatever our disagreements with each other, we will have a united front against the Chinese. This is a racial component of this conflict. And to be fair, there were many people in the United States who were opposed to the British. And this is the run-up to the Civil War. They're still smarting over a number of other things that people couldn't smart over. And even though there had been treaties to negotiate borders and settle things, there was still a very anti-British crowd in America. It really doesn't change until the early 1900s, when the British really work with America to try to make good relations with them. But in this case, it doesn't matter what the overall geopolitics are. In China, the American captain said blood is thicker than water, and he meant that. The French are also involved in this phase of the conflict here, because there was a missionary there who had been executed. He'd gone to a part of China that he wasn't supposed to go to, and the French are protecting him, so they're involved. They send their troops in as well. And they get to the Summer Palace just north of Beijing. And the British decide to burn it. The French withdraw. They go, okay, well, we're not going that far. The British burn the Summer Palace. And this really drives the issue home. And the Qing government realized we cannot defend our capital. We've got the Nian Rebellion, or the Nian Rebellion, we've got the Taiping Rebellion, we've got the rebellion out in Western China, there's other stuff going down in Southern China where the Taiping aren't, and we really need this whole thing to go away. The anti-British group in the court, they're no longer being heard. It's the conciliatory faction, and they say, okay, let's have another treaty here. Well, coming out of that, it's now the Convention of Beijing. The first requirement is you hold to the Treaty of Tianjin. Second, the peninsula of Kowloon down here in Hong Kong, down there, that now gets added to Hong Kong. The British now get a mainland connection to China, added to their territory, and that let's see here, what are the other ones? Yes. That there's freedom of religion in China, and that the Chinese pay even more indemnity, And then two pieces of trade get legalized. One, you're probably not surprised about, opium. We've talked a lot about opium here, and it's famous that the British were bringing in opium. But then the second bit of trade is not always talked about as much because some people see it as worse than drug trafficking, human trafficking. Now, the British are against a slave trade. They are against the purchase of people to be sold elsewhere. 100% against that. What they're not against is taking laborers from China and India, high population areas of the empire, and bringing them to areas where the population isn't sufficient to work these crops that require lots of manual labor. The laborers that they bring in from China and India are derogatorily called coolies. So the term is insulting. It's not meant to be a compliment. It's not meant... And it's also meant as a euphemism. Because if you call them indentured laborers, that means, wait a minute, they've signed over their freedom in a contract that they may or may not have understood completely, and that may or may not have been presented to them accurately. Translation, they didn't understand what they were signing, and they were lied to about what was going to happen when they got to where they were going, to either mine or work in the fields as slaves. That's what an indentured servant is. You signed it. You went into a contract to enter into slavery for a period of time, after which you get some kind of benefit, or you get to have land or wages or something, but you're treated as a slave for the duration of that contract, which is slavery. And the British are engaged in this human trafficking, taking people from China to Australia, to South America, to the Caribbean. They also do the same with people from India. And the Chinese government was very much against that because, their people are essentially, in some cases, they're being kidnapped and forced into this. That's where we get the expression, to be shanghaied. Like, I was shanghaied and now I'm working on this ship here. There's some kind of press gang involved in getting you picked up and forcibly made to work in a position that you did not want to work in. And I don't know if it's directly related to this particular thing, but it's still an expression meaning you're brought in like this. So yes, the British are engaged in the opium trade and the so close you could almost call it slavery trade. Lots of money involved in that, and that's what they demand. Now that they've gotten that treaty and the Convention of Beijing, the British and French now feel ready to support the Qing. Why? One, they've got the thing that legalizes opium with the Qing government, and the Taiping won't recognize that. Two, the Qing government is weak, and they see it as something that they can control. They don't have to occupy China directly. They don't want to. They could take the parts that they want. They could do the trade in the tea and the opium and the people and other goods as they see fit, and that the Qing Empire will actually provide the law enforcement that's needed just to hold it all together. But if the British and French are there, they can help prop it up, and if there's another rebellion, squash that bug with them, and then get back to business. And this is where they turn on the Taiping. The British and French armies do not formally attack the Taiping, but lots of mercenaries join up with the Qing army. They serve as officers to guide Chinese troops with weapons bought from England and France and other parts of Europe, Enfield rifles, Armstrong cannon, and they're trained on how to use them, and then they go into battle against the Taiping and are able to defeat them. At the same time, there's what's called the self-strengthening movement in China, where people realize in order to keep more British from attacking us, we have to be stronger ourselves. We may have lost what we have lost, but we don't have to lose any more. And to deal with all the rebellions, we need to modernize. And we have permission given over to generals inside of this area here to raise their own armies, their own personal armies. They work for the Qing emperor, but they have their own army, and they train it and they staff it, and these are warlords because they have their own army. But it's the combination of the warlords, the foreign involvement in helping to staff these units. There's a group called the Ever Victorious Army that's led by a guy by the name of Chinese Gordon, and he promotes all his victories very loudly in the press, becomes a figure of legend. Well, when he leaves the Ever Victorious Army, many of its officers are looking around for the highest bidder, and then they get hired by the Taiping, and they just switch over to that side. The Westerners are not necessarily principled involved participants. They are mercenary participants in this conflict, and they're making lots of money. In fact, so much so that people who are trying to who are hired to serve as policemen in Shanghai just leave their job and they go become a mercenary in some Chinese army and make a fortune that way. It's a bit crazy. This is also one reason why the British bring in a lot of Sikhs. It's an Indian group there, noted by religion and distinctive dress, and they use them to serve as policemen throughout their posts in China because they feel like they can keep them in line better than their own people who will run off and become part of a mercenary band. Yeah. So as the Taiping are, there's a third reason why the Taiping are falling apart. In addition to the military reasons, they're starting to fight amongst themselves. They're crumbling from within. Do you remember Hong, the guy who said he was the younger brother of Jesus? Yeah. Not everybody is buying into that, and it's leading to him being kind of depressed, and it's not working out well for the Taiping. But at the same time, this about 1860 to 1864, after that second treaty, the Convention of Beijing is signed, there is actual talk in England about, are we going to do to China what we did to India? Are we going to make it a protectorate? And, kick the French out while we're at it, but make it a protectorate and just, take, because that's what they did in India. They took local authority and just layer the British on top of that. Are we going to do are we going to do the same thing in China? And there was consideration of it, and potentially they could have done it. All it would have taken would have been just a bit more force. Bring in some more troops from India, knock out the Qing. You've got plenty of local administrators who could be willing to work for you. As it was, they didn't pursue that. The Qing eventually were able to end the Taiping Rebellion and then end the other rebellions by 1873. And that gets us to, definitely through the middle of the 1800s and heading into the later period where there's going to be even more economic exploitation of China. But this is the time period in which these unequal treaties are signed, and where the British get that right of navigation on the Yangtze, which is so offensive. You think of if a foreign nation forced your nation to allow it to travel freely, no passport required, no requirements at all, and that they're also selling drugs to everybody wherever they go, potentially. How would you feel? Probably deeply insulted and humiliated. Well, that's what's happening here. That's why this is a time period that they refer to as the century of humiliation. This is a 100-year period that foreign people are basically telling the Chinese what to do, and the Chinese are finding themselves unable to resist it properly. They do resist, but they cannot end the oppression. And that's why in that movie, at around the 12-minute mark, there's the depiction of the Amethyst incident and a very strong propaganda message attached to it, that this was the end of that century of humiliation. Oh, and in all this, I forgot to mention that this is also when the Russians get to have Vladivostok, this Jilin area here, that which also makes the British kind of worried as well. Like, maybe we should make China protectorate now before the Russians do. And for those of you who've been following my Victoria 3 game, you see that I had the same philosophy. I should make this a protectorate before the British or the Americans do. And that's why in my other game, France has got a protectorate of China. I did this research to find out, wait, did I do something historically viable? Because that China's big. It's got a big population. But there was the discussion as early as the 1860s. And it could have happened. It didn't, but it could have. It was on the table. It was being discussed. And honestly, yeah, if they had knocked out the leadership and gone with the provincials, I think it could have been done. But anyway, that's my history lesson for the day. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've made it this far, I really hope you have liked and commented and subscribed. And comment for the algorithm. That helps out. Subscribe so you get more of this, yada, 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 all that stuff there. It helps me, and it encourages me. It's like it's like I'm a little rat at a pellet feeder, and every time you hit like, comment, or subscribe, I get a pellet, and if you don't, then I starve. And so by liking, commenting, and subscribe, you're giving me a dopamine release to make more of these. And like a little rat, I'll just be going, I'll talk about more history. Yeah. I'll talk about more history, and then they'll like, they'll comment, they'll subscribe, and I'll get more viewers, and then I'll do more history. Because honestly, any money I'm going to make on this is just going to pay for more history books. I am nowhere near the level of a life of luxury, as people like, comment, and subscribe for my YouTube empire. No, I have no YouTube empire. I am going to break even. I'm talking, it's like I'm on the street and I'm a beggar, and you put money in my hat so I can go and buy more history books because I'm addicted to them. I'm trying to kick it. I'm trying to watch more sports and pop music, but I can't, man. I keep coming back to the history and the economics, the hard stuff, the macroeconomics, man. I can't get enough of it. And if I talk enough on YouTube, people will send me these things, and then I get a small check from YouTube, and I can go and buy more books. It's incredible. This is the hell that I live in, and that you can enable it by liking, commenting, and subscribing, and then joining my Discord. Hey, why not? It's a fun place to discuss these ideas. A lot of people are having a good time there and saying it's a nice, friendly place to be able to share ideas. So, hey, Anyway, I've gone on long enough. I was thinking of making it go 50 minutes. It's now at 48:12. Let me give you a minute and 40 seconds of your life back now. Just like that. Just by hitting the stop recording button.